Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on, well, a truly massive topic, the entire history of Persia, which is, modern-day Iran.
It's huge.
And we want to extract the essential knowledge you need to really grasp its centrality. I mean, we're talking about a civilization that's been a pivot point for Eurasia, for culture, trade, power, for 6,000 years. That predates Rome by millennia.
It's a staggering scope, absolutely. But our mission today, it's actually very focused. We're looking for those unique factors. What allowed this region, which has been constantly invaded, conquered, ruled by foreigners?
Again and again.
Right. How did it always reemerge? Still powerful, still culturally distinct. Elamites, Greeks, Turks, Mongols, they all came through. But Persia endured.
Yeah.
How? What's the secret sauce, if you like?
So we're working from a pretty comprehensive historical overview. It takes us from deep prehistory.
Right up to the present day, basically.
Yeah.
Modern geopolitics.
Exactly. So we need to move quickly, but, thoroughly. We want to pull out that administrative genius, the cultural flexibility, those long-term conflicts, the things that really define this amazing durability. Okay, let's dive in. Starting right at the beginning, dawn of civilization stuff and this foundational culture shaped by geography. So when we look at the earliest people in this region, we're really talking about the roots of settled life, aren't we?
Absolutely. The sources point to places like Choga Golan, Choga Bonnet.
Yeah.
These are sites in the Zagros Mountain.
And they date back how far?
All the way back to 7200 BC. We're seeing early agricultural villages, people cultivating wild barley, lentils, legumes.
Yeah.
The very beginnings of farming in that area.
And it wasn't just basic survival, right? They were already developing some complex techniques.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty amazing. This agricultural revolution was sophisticated enough that we have proof of early fermentation. There's actually a 7,000-year-old jar of wine. Yeah, it was found there. Now it's at the University of Pennsylvania. It just shows you, even in deep prehistory, this wasn't some primitive backwater. It was a thriving, complex culture.
And crucially, even then, it was already connected to Mesopotamia, modern Iraq.
Deeply linked. The big Sumerian city, Ur, actually extended its influence eastward and founded Susa. That might have been as early as 4395 BC, maybe even earlier.
And Susa, that name keeps coming up. It becomes a real anchor point.
It really does. It became the capital of Elam. And Elam is... well, it's the first defined nation in that whole region. Just think about the longevity. Elam lasted
5.5 millennia.
As a power.
Continuous power. Until finally the Mongols just obliterated it. But for thousands of years, it was there. And Elam, it was likely a coalition, different tribes working together. The Mesopotamians called them Halmai. Those are the high country, the mountain. Which
brings us straight to this huge theme that sources emphasize, the 6,000-year conflict. Mountain people versus plain geography as destiny. It really seems that way. It's this ideological divide, but also fundamentally agricultural.
How so?
Well, think about it. The people on the plain in Mesopotamia, they had the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Yeah.
So they could develop this really sophisticated, heavy irrigation agriculture.
Which means more food, bigger populations.
Exactly. Higher population density, complex administration needed to manage the water.
Right.
But maybe also a bit more rigidity, a bit more vulnerability.
Right. Compared to the mountain people, the Elamites, and later the Iranians and the Zagros.
They were tougher. Maybe rougher, sure. Semi-nomadic pastoralists. The terrain itself made them resilient, hard to conquer.
Yeah.
And they were perfectly placed to raid the rich, maybe softer plains.
So it's this constant push and pull. The irrigators versus the pests.
And the sources make a really compelling case that this dynamic, this struggle for regional dominance just kept going, millennia after millennia, to the point where, the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the sources actually characterize it as just the latest episode. The highest-tech version, maybe. But fundamentally, the same 6,000-year geographical contest for mastery.
Okay, hold on. Framing the Iran-Iraq War like that, doesn't that downplay, really important modern factors like Shia versus Sunni religious tension or oil politics? That seems like a huge...
That's a fair challenge, and it's where the nuance comes in. The source material isn't saying those modern factors don't matter. Of course they do. Shia versus Sunni is, obviously a massive factor today.
Right.
But the argument is that the underlying strategic geometry, dictated by the mountains and the plain, remains constant. The power center up on the Iranian plateau is almost inherently driven to neutralize or influence the power center down in the fertile, vulnerable Iraqi plain.
So the modern ideologies, the religion, the oil, they layer on top of this ancient geographical reality.
That's the idea presented. It's not only about geography, but geography sets the stage, the theater of conflict, and maybe provides this deep historical impulse that keeps resurfacing in different forms.
Okay, that's a fascinating lens. So digging into Elamite culture itself, even though their writing is tough to translate, right? Started around 3200 BC.
Yeah, translation is still a challenge, but we can see some really distinctive things from their art and archaeology, things that clearly influenced later Persian identity.
Like their art.
Yeah, their art is a great example. It's very focused on natural animals, dogs, bulls, very different from the Sumerians or Egyptians who loved those human-animal hybrid figures. The Elamites seem to have rejected.
And their religion.
Polytheistic, seems pretty tolerant, definitely nature-focused. They had a prominent mother goddess figure.
And they passed on specific practices, didn't they? Like worshiping in high places.
Exactly. Rituals in sacred groves on mountaintop. That practice of using elevated places for worship seems to carry right through into later Zoroastrian. It's a clear cultural link.
But maybe the most significant cultural element, especially for our theme of enduring trait, is the status of women in Egypt.
Absolutely crucial. You see Elamite queens depicted almost as equals to the king. Women commanded great respect, held real influence. And this respect for women is something later that was Persian societies seem to have consciously preserved.
Which really stands out compared to, say, ancient Greece or Rome at the time.
It really does. It's a distinctive thread. And economically, Elam was no slouch either. Susa was a massive trade hub.
Trading how far?
All over the known world. We have evidence of trade with the Indus Valley, which is incredible for that period. And critically, Elam was probably the main transit point for tin.
Tin, which you need for bronze.
Exactly. The tin likely came from Afghanistan or eastern Iran. Elam controlled the route, linking the metal sources in the east with the big consumers in Mesopotamia and Egypt. They were the linchpin for the Bronze Age economy. Okay, so the shift from Elamite dominance to Iranian power, it wasn't sudden. It was a slow process, starting around 2000 BC. That's when we see these Iranian-speaking peoples, the Medes, the Persians, the Parthians migrating onto the plateau, probably from the Eurasian steppes.
But this wasn't a case of wiping the slate clean, right? Elamite stuck around.
Definitely not. It was more like an overlay. Elamite culture, their administrative methods, they persisted. In fact, Elamite remained a key administrative language for generations, even under Iranian rule.
So who unified these incoming groups for?
That was the Mede. They really came together in the 8th century BC, largely as a reaction against the Assyrians.
Who were notoriously brutal.
Extremely brutal. So the Medes federated the different tribes in the region, formed an alliance with Babylon, and together they finally managed to sack the Assyrian capital, Nineveh, in 612 BC, a major turning.
But the real game changer, the name everyone knows, comes from within the Median setup, a vassal king.
Cyrus the Great. Exactly. He was technically a vassal of the Medes, but he rebelled in 553 BC. And that's the moment the Achaemenid Empire, the first great Persian empire, is born. He unified the Iranian peoples into this incredibly structured, stable, and rapidly expanding state.
And he wasn't just a conqueror, he was a strategist. Conquered Babylon in 539, pushed east into India by 533.
Master strategist. And the story of how he overthrew the Medes is telling. He apparently teamed up with a disgruntled Median general, Harpagus.
Right.
Instead of just crushing the enemy, he co-opted a key part of their military command. That instantly signals serious political skill, not just brute force. It showed he could turn enemies into allies, build consensus.
And this political skill is reflected in how he set up the empire's governance, right? This becomes the Persian model.
It really does. He centered the administration back in Susa, that old Elamite hub. Notice the continuity.
Using existing infrastructure and knowledge.
Smart.
Very smart. And he set up this system of regional governors, the satrap.
Okay, so governors isn't revolutionary. Lots of empires had governors. What made the Persian system so durable? How did they stop these satraps from just becoming independent kings?
That's the genius part. And maybe the core of Persian administration. The satraps had a lot of local power, yeah, but, and this is the key, their authority was constantly checked by the kings.
The spies and inspectors. Exactly. A really efficient, sophisticated, centralized network of inspectors reporting directly back to Cyrus. It was this blend. Decentralized regional administration for flexibility, but powerful central oversight to maintain control and unity. That's what gave it stability. It could manage a vast, diverse empire without instantly falling apart when a strong ruler.
And this efficiency wasn't just political, it extended to communications too. The postal system.
Oh, the post system was revolutionary. Standardization on a continental scale. Imagine couriers traveling fixed routes.
And finding everything they need.
Fresh food, water, a bed, new horses, all waiting for them reliably every 2 days' journey or so. It was so incredibly effective, so well suited to the geography.
That other empires just copied it wholesale.
For 1,500 years. The Hellenistic Greeks, the Arab caliphates, they basically kept the Achaemenid postal system intact. It's hard to overstate how much foundational administrative infrastructure was laid down right at the beginning.
And this model wasn't just admired locally, it had global reach, didn't it? Influencing even the founding fathers of the U.S.
That's right. Thomas Jefferson actually read Xenophon's Cyropaedia. It's essentially a biography, maybe slightly idealized, of Cyrus, focusing on his just and efficient rule. And Jefferson apparently drew inspiration from it when thinking about the Declaration of Independence.
Incredible. But Cyrus's legacy wasn't just administration. It was also about, well, a different style of tolerance.
A complete break from the Assyrian model of terror and brutality. When he conquered Babylon, think about this, he allowed the Israelites who'd been exiled there to return home.
Which is why he's praised in the Hebrew Bible, the only non-Jewish figure called a Messiah.
Exactly. And the Babylonians themselves, they apparently saw him as a liberator. He respected their local culture, their gods. He wasn't there to erase them. He was there to rule them justly within his larger empire. Oh, and militarily, he created the Immortals.
The elite 10,000-man fighting force.
Ensuring military stability alongside that political wisdom. A powerful combination.
Okay, so after Cyrus, the empire kept expanding. His son Cambyses conquered Egypt, making the Achaemenid Empire the largest Iranian empire ever.
Physically the largest, yeah. Then came Darius I, who pushed even further into the Indus Valley. But Darius, and especially his son Xerxes, they get tangled up in the wars with the Greeks.
The famous clashes, Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis.
Right. Darius's first attempt at invading Greece, it kind of fizzled out at Marathon in 490. The sources suggest maybe it wasn't a full-scale invasion attempt, perhaps undersized, and they lost a chunk of the fleet in the storm too.
So maybe not the crushing defeat.
Possibly more of a setback or a failed expedition. The real major effort came under Xerxes. He's the one who famously burned Athens in 480.
But then suffered those huge defeats, Salamis at sea.
And Plataea on land the next year. Those were decisive Greek victories that really halted Persian expansion in Greece.
And things didn't end well for Xerxes personally.
No. He was assassinated back home in 465 BC, killed by the commander of his own royal bodyguard. So yeah, the Greek wars were a significant drain and maybe a strategic misstep. But Persia itself remained this enormous, wealthy, powerful entity.
And to manage that power, especially in a fairly dry region, they needed technology, water management.
Absolutely critical. Darius the Great gets credit for the Shushtar hydraulic system. Just an incredible feat of engineering canals, dams, water mills. Yeah. It apparently powered multiple mills and irrigated something like 100,000 acres of land.
But the really iconic, super resilient innovation, kind of.
The Qanat, yes. This speaks directly to our theme of durability. It's the definition of resilient infrastructure.
So what makes them so special? They're underground canals.
They are, but it's how they work and how they're built. Two key things, longevity and invisibility. They cap into underground water table, often miles away up in the foot.
So not reliant on surface rivers or rain.
Exactly. The water flows gently downhill through these hand-dug tunnels, sometimes for dozens of miles. Because it's underground, evaporation is almost zero, crucial in that climate. It guarantees a steady water supply for cities and farms, regardless of seasonal rain.
And the engineering must have been precise.
Incredibly precise. They had to maintain a very slight, consistent downward slope over huge distances. Too steep, the water erodes the tunnel. Too flat, it stagnates. And they dug vertical access shafts all along the route for maintenance.
Which also means
they were incredibly durable. Because they're underground, they're largely immune to damage from war or floods or earthquakes. An enemy couldn't easily poison or divert the water supply. Qanats built thousands of years ago are still functioning today.
That's just astounding resilience. Permanent, robust public utility, basically. And they had other clever tech, too, like the Yakchal.
The Yakchal? Yeah, these are brilliant. Basically, ancient refrigerators. Huge conical clay domes. They'd harvest ice in the winter from nearby mountains or frozen ponds, store it packed with insulation inside the Yakchal.
And it would stay frozen.
All through the hot summer months, allowing them food, have cool drinks. Again, really sophisticated, durable technology, perfectly adapted to the environment. Low tech, high concept.
Culturally, they were innovators too. The sources mention claims they invented the tar.
Which is an ancestor of the guitar, yeah.
And popularized backgammon. And maybe chess, though India might argue that one.
Right. The origins of chess are often debated. But backgammon seems strongly associated with Persia. We have to come back to the social structure. Slavery wasn't as widespread as in Greece or Rome.
A minor part of society.
And that remarkable status for women, it continued from the Elamite period. Women in Achaemenid Persia had significant freedoms by ancient standards.
Like what specifically?
They could own land, run businesses, manage their own money. Aristocratic women traveled freely, they rode horses, even practiced archery activities, usually reserved strictly for men in places like Greece.
It's a consistent thread of difference. Finally, underpinning the Achaemenid Empire was its religion, Zoroastrianism.
Absolutely fundamental. Founded by the prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra Datium, is tricky, maybe sometime between the 10th and 6th centuries BC. It's one of the world's oldest monotheistic or perhaps dualistic religion.
And its theological impact was enormous, wasn't it?
Staggering. Many core concepts that appear later in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam seem to have roots here. The idea of a cosmic battle between a supreme god of good, Ahura Mazda, and a supreme entity of evil, Ahriman.
Free will, heaven and hell.
Yep, free will is central. Humans choose which side to support. Concepts of heaven and hell, angels and demons, a final judgment, all seem to have early expressions in Zoroastrianism. Interestingly, their god of good, Ahura Mazda, was seen as omniscient, all-knowing, but not omnipotent, not all-powerful.
Meaning the struggle with evil was real, not predetermined.
Exactly. It was a genuine cosmic battle playing out, and fire played a big role in their worship, seen as a symbol of purity and truth.
And this idea of Asha, truth and righteousness, was explicitly linked to governance.
Yes, Asha is often translated as truth or righteousness, but it's a deeper concept, more like cosmic order, divine law, the proper way things should be. Cyrus and later Achaemenid kings explicitly claimed their rule was based on upholding Asha, their justice, their tolerance. It was framed as maintaining this cosmic balance.
And the influence spread far beyond the Abraham.
Oh, yes. Into Greek philosophy, maybe even influencing aspects of Buddhism. And, of course, the famous story of the three magi visiting the infant Jesus in the New Testament.
They were Zoroastrian.
There were Zoroastrian priests, astronomers, or astrologers from Persia. It just shows the deep interconnections between these ancient worldviews.
Okay, so this long era of Achaemenid stability, built on this, administrative skill, cultural tolerance, technological innovation, it gets completely upended by one individual, Alexander the Great.
Yeah, Alexander. Tutored by Aristotle, supposedly a great admirer of Cyrus, he apparently read the Cyropedia closely, came of age incredibly fast, commanding an army at 16, king of Macedon at 20.
And his rise was marked by, incredible Ruth alongside them.
Chillingly effective. He secured his own throne back in Macedon by executing potential rival. Then, before even invading Persia, he made this brutal example of the Greek city of Thebes when it rebelled in 335 BC.
What did he do?
Razed the city to the ground, killed thousands, sold the rest of the population into slavery. The message was crystal clear. Resist Alexander and you face annihilation. Calculated terror.
And his military genius, it was amplified hugely by the contrast with the Persian emperor at the time, Darius III, who was, not exactly Cyrus the Great.
No. Darius III seems to have been completely outmatched. Alexander invades Persia with maybe 50,000 men. The Persian army was at least twice that size, probably much larger.
So how did Alexander overcome those odds?
Leadership, pure and simple. Look at the Battle of Isis in 333 BC. Darius III actually had the advantage, chose the ground, but then he picked a narrow coastal plain to fight on.
Negating his numbers advantage.
Completely. And then, the crucial moment, when Alexander's elite cavalry broke through the Persian line, Darius III panicked. He turned his chariot and fled. He was the first to run.
Causing the whole army to collapse.
Exactly. The army wasn't beaten yet, but seeing the emperor flee. Total collapse, a complete rout.
And he abandoned his family.
Left his wife, his daughters, his mother, all his royal symbols, everything behind for Alexander to capture. Just unbelievable. And then, 2 years later, at Gaugamela.
He does it again?
Pretty much. He gathers an even larger army, this time on wide open plains. Perfect terrain for his cavalry and number. The battle hangs in the balance, and Darius flees again, before a clear winner is even decided on the battlefield.
It's just catastrophic leadership.
It really highlights the contrast. Alexander was always leading from the very front, charging into the thick of it, risking his life constantly. That inspires incredible loyalty. Darius III, twice, personally caused the rout of armies potentially capable of crushing the Greeks, simply by prioritizing his own escape.
So the sources suggest the Achaemenid system itself wasn't broken, it was just this one generation's leadership failure.
That seems to be the argument. The empire was still vast, wealthy, reasonably well administered. It collapsed not from systemic decay, but from this absolute mismatch in leadership at the crucial moment.
So Alexander sweeps through. He takes Persepolis, the imperial capital, in 330.
Famously burns it, possibly as revenge for Xerxes burning the Acropolis in Athens 150 years earlier, though the exact motives are debated. It was a hugely symbolic act.
Yet, paradoxically, he also seemed to want to become a Persian emperor himself.
Yeah, this is the fascinating tension. He marries one of Darius III's daughters, Roxana. He adopts Persian dress, incorporates Persian court ceremonies, tries to integrate Persians into his army and administration. He seemed to genuinely respect Persian culture, or at least see the need to rule as a Persian king to hold the empire together.
Which didn't go down well with his Macedonian.
Not at all. They saw it as him going native, becoming corrupted, forgetting his Greek roots. There was intense cultural friction. The source mentions a famous incident where Alexander, probably drunk, killed one of his oldest friends, Clitus the Black. Because Clitus basically accused him of becoming a barbarian tyrant, adopting this Oriental lifestyle. It shows the deep cultural chasm and the pressures Alexander was under trying to bridge it.
And then, just as he's seemingly conquered the known world, He died suddenly.
Very suddenly. In Babylon, 323 BC, he was only 32. The cause is still debated. Fever, maybe malaria, typhoid. Poisoning has always been speculated, but there's no real proof. He supposedly left his vast empire to the strongest,
Leading to chaos.
well, fragmentation. His generals, the Diadochi, fought over the pieces. The empire eventually fractured into 4 main successor kingdoms, ruled by Macedonian dynasties. This kicks off the Hellenistic period.
And what did this mean for the average person living in Persia? Did life change dramatically?
Probably not that much for the average farmer or artisan initially. The biggest change was at the top. The ruling class, the administration, the military leadership became Greek or Macedonian, or at least heavily Hellenized. Local elites who adopted Greek ways could prosper.
And Greek culture spread.
Massive. Hellenism lasted for about 3 centuries. Greek became the language of learning, philosophy, science, administration across the Near East and Central Asia. Think about the Septuagint, the first Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible composed in Hellenistic Egypt. It shows how dominant Greek language and thought became.
And this fusion went even further, Greco-Buddhist.
Yeah, that's a fascinating offshoot. In the far eastern parts of Alexander's former empire, places like Bactria, modern Afghanistan, Greek culture blended with local traditions, including Buddhism. This Greco-Buddhism, with its Greek-influenced Buddhist art, became a major conduit for Buddhism's spread along the Silk Road into China.
But Greek rule in the Persian heartland itself didn't last forever. They were eventually pushed out by the Parthians.
Exactly. Around 247 BC, an Iranian nomadic group, the Parthians, originally from the area of modern Turkmenistan, rebelled against the Greek Seleucid rulers who controlled Persia and Mesopotamia. They gradually established their own empire.
And the Parthian Empire was notably long-lasting itself, almost 500 years. What was their key to stability?
It seems their system of governance was different, less purely autocratic than the Achaemenids, perhaps. More aristocratic, maybe feudal in a way.
How so?
Well, one crucial aspect the sources highlight is that the Parthian nobility, the powerful clan, seemed to have had the institutional right to actually vote to depose an unfit king.
Without necessarily starting a massive civil war every time.
That seems to be the implication. It provided a mechanism for leadership change, for removing a disastrous ruler that might have actually contributed to long-term political stability compared to, say, the Roman system where assassinations and civil wars over succession were constant.
And the Parthians became Rome's great eastern rival.
Bitter rivals. They effectively blocked Roman expansion eastward for centuries. Their military was formidable, especially their cavalry. They revived the steppe tradition of skilled mounted archers.
Famous for the
Parthian shot, firing backwards at full gallop while pretending to retreat. Devastating tactic against pursuing heavy infantry or cavalry.
And they handed Rome one of its most humiliating Crassus.
Oh yeah, the Battle of Cara, 53 BC. Total disaster for the Rome. Crassus, one of the richest men in Rome, part of the first triumvirate with Caesar and Pompey, invaded Parthia looking for glory and got wiped out. He was killed, and the legend arose that the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat.
A message about his legendary...
A brutal symbolic message. And culturally, the Parthian era wasn't just Iranian resurgence, it was a real synth, a full blend of the preceding Greek Hellenistic culture and the native Iranian tradition.
Any examples of that blend?
Religion is a good one. The cult of Mithra, an ancient Iranian deity associated with light, contracts, and warfare, became hugely popular under the Parthians. And this Parthian version of Mithra worship
inspired the Roman cult of Mithras.
Exactly. The Roman mystery cult of Mithras, which became incredibly popular, especially within the Roman army, seems to have drawn heavily from the Parthian worship of Mithra. It was this kind of secret society, a major competitor to early Christianity for a while. Shows that cultural flow wasn't just one way. Okay, so after nearly 5 centuries, the Parthian era gives way to the Sasanian Empire in 224 AD. And this is often seen as like the peak moment for classical Persian culture.
Founded by Persians this time, not Parthians.
Right, founded by Ardashir I, who came from an old Persian noble family from Fars, the traditional Persian heartland, Cyrus's home region, in fact. And the Sasanians made a very conscious effort to restore a more purely Iranian culture and a stronger, more centralized power after the more decentralized Parthian period.
So a deliberate restoration of Achaemenid ideals, in a way?
In many ways, yes. And a key part of that was religion. Under the Sasanians, Zoroastrianism becomes the official state.
Why make it official now? It had been important under the Achaemenids, but they were generally tolerant, weren't they?
They were. But the geopolitical context had changed dramatically. The Sasanians' main rival was Rome, and later the Byzantine Empire in the West. And Rome-Byzantium was becoming increasingly officially Christian.
So making Zoroastrianism the state religion was a way to differentiate themselves, a clear ideological marker against...
Precisely. It defines Sasanian identity in opposition to the Christians. Now, that doesn't mean they persecuted everyone else. Other religions were generally tolerant, especially Jews.
Right, you mentioned the Babylonian Talmud.
Exactly. Huge centers of Jewish learning flourished at the same time. But Zoroastrianism definitely had primacy. And this Sasanian period saw an incredible flowering of culture. Their architecture, their metalwork, philosophy, literature. It's considered the height of classical Persian.
And their influence spread wide, didn't it?
Hugely influenced. Sasanian art styles, administrative technique, court protocols. These were later adopted and adapted across the entire Muslim world after the Arab conquest. They set the standard for imperial grandeur in the region. And technologically, they were still innovating. There's that intriguing find, that so-called Baghdad battery.
Right, tell me about it.
Basically a clay pot found near Baghdad, dating probably to the Parthian or Sasanian period. Inside there's a copper cylinder, and inside that an iron rod, insulated from the copper. If you filled it with an electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice.
It could produce an electric current.
A small voltage, yes. We've no idea what they might have used it for. Maybe electroplating jewelry, maybe some kind of religious or medical quackery. It's a mystery, but it suggests a level of experimentation.
And trade was booming. So
absolutely central. The Sasanians controlled a huge chunk of the Silk Road and dominated the Indian Ocean trade route. They had close ties with China, exchanging artists, goods, even cooperating militarily sometimes against nomadic groups threatening the trade route. A very interconnected world.
So an apex empire, wealthy, sophisticated, influential. What went wrong? How did they fall?
It seems to be a combination of factors. Like many empires, they got worn down by constant warfare. Decades, centuries really, of grinding attritional wars against the Byzantine took a massive toll on manpower and resources.
Then disease.
A huge part. The plague of Shiro, around 627 AD, seems to have been devastating. Hit the population hard, weakened the state significantly, and then right after the plague, they inflicted a wound on themselves.
The Civil War.
A really nasty one. Lasted 4 or 5 years, from about 628 to 632 AD. The sources mention maybe up to 10 different claimants fighting for the throne in that short period. Constant instability at the very top.
So, weakened by war, plague, and internal conflict, they were vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable. And that's the exact moment the newly unified Arab-Muslim armies explode out of the Arabian Peninsula, inspired by Islam.
Perfect timing for the invaders.
Terrible timing for the Sasanians. They actually repelled the first Arab attack, but the empire was just too weakened. They lost a decisive battle in 636 AD, losing Mesopotamia and all their territory west of modern Iran. The whole empire collapsed remarkably quickly after that, falling completely by 642 AD.
What was the immediate aftermath like for the conquered Persians?
It varied. The sources mention instances of Zoroastrian sacred texts being burned, certainly some initial destruction. Non-Muslims, Zoroastrians, Christians, Jews were generally allowed to practice their faith, but they had to pay a special tax, the jizya.
Which we should probably understand in context, right? It wasn't just punitive.
Right. It's important to understand the historical context. Yes, the jizya was discriminatory by modern standards, but in the context of the time, it granted these communities protected status. It exempted them from military service, which Muslims were obligated to perform. It was part of a system that, while hierarchical, allowed these ancient religious communities to survive and often thrive for centuries under Muslim rule.
And conversion to Islam, it wasn't instant?
Not at all. Forced conversion wasn't the standard policy. Mass conversion of the Iranian population to Islam was actually a very slow process. It took centuries, really until the late Middle Ages, for Islam to become the majority religion across Persia. Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Judaism persisted significantly for a long time.
Okay, so this leads to maybe the most fascinating interaction in Persian history.
Yeah.
Islam arrives as a conquering force.
Imposed by Arab armies, yes.
But instead of Persian culture being erased, it ends up profoundly shaping Islam itself, especially outside Arabia.
Absolutely. This is where that incredible cultural resilience shines again. Persian civilization wasn't destroyed. In many ways, it co-opted the conqueror.
How did that work?
Well, the early Arab Caliphate, ruling this vast new empire stretching from Spain to India, quickly realized they had no idea how to actually administer it effectively. They didn't have the bureaucratic traditions, the systems.
What the Persians, centuries of experience.
Exactly. So the Umayyad Caliphate, the first dynasty after the initial conquest, they very quickly adopted Sasanian administrative structures, financial systems, even court ceremonies and protocol. They relied heavily on educated Persians to actually run the empire.
So the Arabs were the rulers, but Persians were running the machinery of state.
To a large extent, yeah. And this became even more pronounced under the next dynasty, the Abbasids. The Abbasids actually came to power with significant help from Iranian generals and forces from eastern Persia.
So they were more open to Persia.
Much more integrated. They moved the capital from Damascus closer to the old Persian heartland, building Baghdad in 762 AD, right near the ruins of ancient Babylon, and the Sasanian capital to test it. Strategically brilliant.
And Baghdad becomes the center of the Islamic Golden Age.
The absolute epicenter, an explosion of learning, science, culture. They established the first paper mill outside China there, which was revolutionary for spreading knowledge.
And they weren't just creating new knowledge, they were preserving the old, too.
Hugely important. Scholars in Baghdad undertook a massive translation movement, preserving and studying ancient Greek, Roman, and Persian texts that might otherwise have been lost. Aristotle, Plato, Galen, much of their work survived because it was translated into Arabic here.
And the contributions were across the board.
Mathematics algebra is an Arabic word derived from the title of a book by the Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi. Optics, astronomy, medicine. And they were transmitting innovations from further east too. Things like the sextant, the concept of zero from India, gunpowder from China often reached Europe via the Islamic world.
And this intellectual ferment, it wasn't just Muslims involved.
Critically important point. This golden age was a collaborative effort. Christian, Jewish, and even Zoroastrian scholars and scientists played absolutely vital roles, especially in translation, medicine, and philosophy. The caliphs actively supported and utilized talent from all these communities. It was remarkably cosmopolitan for its time.
But Abbasid power eventually faded too. And then came another wave of invaders, the Turks.
Right. By the 10th century, Abbasid political control was weakening. And you have the arrival of the Seljuk Turks, nomadic warriors from the Central Asian steppes. They swept in, conquered Persia and much of the Middle East.
So another foreign conquest. Did this disrupt the system again?
Here's that pattern again. Militarily, yes, the Turks took over. But administratively, the Seljuks, being nomads originally, also relied heavily on the existing Persian bureaucracy to run things.
So the players change, but the game continued.
Pretty much. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad remained the nominal religious head, the figurehead. The Seljuk sultans held the real military and state power, but the day-to-day administration, the tax collection, the running of the chancellor, that often stayed in the hands of experienced Iranian officials. Administrative continuity, yet again, despite a change in the ruling military.
Okay, so Persia has this amazing track record of absorbing invaders, Greeks, Arabs, Turks, while maintaining its administrative and cultural core. But then came the Mongols in the 13th century, and the sources describe this as something different.
Yeah, the Mongol invasion under Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, was on another level entirely, different from previous nomadic Khan. It wasn't just about regime change, it was about systematic destruction on a scale that's hard to fathom.
What made it so different? The brutality.
The scale and the seeming purpose behind the brutality. They didn't just defeat armies, they often systematically slaughtered entire city populations. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 AD is the infamous example.
Considered the end of the Islamic Golden Age?
Effectively, yes. They destroyed the House of Wisdom, threw countless irreplaceable books into the Tigris until it supposedly ran black with ink. A devastating blow to intellectual life. Mosques burned, scholars killed. The human cost was immense.
But the sources highlight something else too. A specific type of destruction that had incredibly long-lasting consequences for the land itself.
The Qanats.
They deliberately destroyed the Qanats.
Widespread, systematic destruction of those underground water channels. This wasn't just collateral damage, it seems like a deliberate strategy. Destroying the Qanats meant destroying the agricultural basis of the Iranian plateau.
Turning farmland back into desert, basically.
Exactly. It rendered vast areas uninhabitable, led to depopulation, famine. The economic and ecological damage was profound and took centuries, literally centuries, to even partially recover. It struck at the very foundation of the civilization's resilience, its water supply.
Did Persia recover at all under Mongol rule?
Partially. The Mongol dynasty that ruled Persia, the Ilkhanate, eventually converted to Islam, mostly the Sufi variant. They did try to repair some infrastructure, patronize arts to some extent, but the initial shockwave was immense.
And just as things might have been stabilizing, another conqueror, Timur the Lame,
Timur comes storming through in the late 14th century, around 1381 onwards. He saw himself as a restorer of the Mongol Empire in a way. He was the last of the great nomadic conquerors from Central Asia.
And known for even more brutality.
If that's possible, yes. Extreme brutality. Infamous for building pyramids out of the skulls of his victims. His policy was simple: surrender unconditionally or face utter annihilation. He's estimated to have killed maybe 17 million people.
Yet the sources also mention this paradox.
Right. Despite the genocide, Timur was also a massive patron of the arts and sciences. His capital at Samarkand became this glittering center of Islamic architecture, poetry, astronomy. A strange and brutal contradiction.
What happened after Timur? Did his empire last?
No, it fractured quickly after his death. And this is a key point. The period after Timur saw the Iranian heartland fall into decades of chaos and anarchy, ruled by various competing Turkmen tribal confederations, the Black Sheep and White Sheep Turkomans, they were called. This period seems to have permanently shattered the political unity of the broader Iranian world that had existed, albeit under different rulers, for so long.
So fragmentation, chaos, but often periods of disorder allowed new forces to rise, right?
Exactly. This political vacuum allowed religious movements, particularly those with Shia mystical leanings, Sufi orders, to gain ground and popular support. People were looking for new forms of order and identity.
And this leads to the rise of the Safavids.
Yes, the Safavid Empire, founded in 1501 by Shah Ismail. He came from a background that was itself a mix of everything that had come before: Turkoman, Kurdish, even Greek and Georgian ancestry through his grandmother. He managed to rally support, defeat the Turkmen tribe, and essentially reconstitute a Persian empire.
And the Safavids made a hugely important decision about identity regarding religion.
Absolutely critical. Shah Ismail and his successors made Shia Islam the official state religion of Persia.
Why was this so significant? Shia Islam had existed in Persia for centuries.
It had, but making it the state religion and actively promoting it, sometimes forcefully converting Sunni populations or suppressing Sunni clerics, was a major shift. It did two things. First, it gave the new Safavid state a distinct identity, unifying Persians under this banner. Second, and crucially for geopolitics, it permanently deepened the theological divide between Iran and its powerful Sunni neighbor, especially the Ottoman Empire to the west.
Setting up centuries of rivalry.
Intense rivalry. And this is the era of the Great Gunpowder Empire. The Safavids in Persia, the Ottomans in Turkey and the Balkans, and the Mughals in India. All three were large, relatively stable, wealthy, innovative empires whose power rested heavily on their mastery of gunpowder weapons, cannons, and firearms.
And the Safavids clashed constantly with the Ottomans.
Regularly. Mostly over control of Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, that old plain versus mountain conflict again, and the Caucasus region. This rivalry actually pushed the Safavids into seeking alliances elsewhere.
With European power.
Exactly. They had surprisingly friendly relations at times with the European powers, who were also rivals of the Ottomans. They traded extensively with the Dutch East India Company, even formed alliances with the Austrian Habsburgs against the Ottomans. Practical politics trumping religious divides.
Then the Safavids modernized their military, too.
Under Shah Abbas I, often called Cyrus the Great, yes. He realized they needed to keep up, especially with the Ottomans. He undertook a major military reform, bringing in European advisors, famously, the English adventurer Sir Robert Shirley and his brother Anthony, to help modernize the army based on European models, particularly improving their artillery and infantry.
Which allowed them to reclaim territory.
Yes. He had considerable success pushing back the Ottomans and Uzbeks and consolidating the empire. This period, the late 16th and early 17th century, is seen as a golden age for Safavid culture too. Beautiful architecture in the capital, Isfahan, the famous Persian carpets. Living standards were probably comparable to much of Europe at the time.
But then stagnation. How did they fall behind Europe?
It seems that by the mid-17th century, a kind of intellectual conservatism set in. The source suggests a reluctance to challenge established knowledge, to embrace the kind of scientific revolution and critical thinking that was starting to take off in Europe. Respect for tradition became a barrier to innovation.
So they started falling behind technologically and scientifically.
That seems to be the case. It put them at a growing disadvantage compared to a rapidly changing Europe.
So this stagnation, combined with incompetent rulers after Shah Abbas, led to decline in the 18th century.
Yeah, the later Safavid Shahs were often... And meanwhile, new powers were rising. Russia, under Peter the Great, was expanding south. They conquered Persia's Caucasian territories, modern-day Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, around 1720. Huge loss.
Was there any fight back?
There was a brief, brutal resurgence under Nader Shah. He overthrew the last Safavid ruler in 1736, restored Persian independence for a time, even launched this incredibly audacious invasion of Mughal India and sacked Delhi in 1739, bringing back immense treasure, including the Peacock Throne.
Wow. So returned
temporarily. But Nader Shah became increasingly paranoid and tyrannical, assassinated his own heirs, and his empire collapsed immediately after his death in 1747, plunging Persia back into chaos.
Which eventually led to the Qajar dynasty over in 1796, and they faced continued pressure from Russia.
Massive pressure. They fought two disastrous wars with Russia in the early 19th century, 1804, 1813, and 1888, and permanently lost all those remaining territories in the Caucasus.
A strategic disaster.
Huge. It cut Persia off from the Black Sea region and left their northern border wide open to Russian influence and military threat. And worse, the Qajar elite, instead of unifying the country, often tried to play Russia and Great Britain, who now controlled India to the east, off against each other, selling influence and concessions to both sides.
Using autonomy.
Increasingly so. This really accelerated with the discovery of oil in southwestern Persia in 1908. Suddenly, there was this massive new resource that foreign powers coveted.
Which led to more interference. interference?
Blatant interference. The 1907 Anglo-Russian Convention basically carved Persia up into spheres of influence, Russia dominating the north, Britain the south, with a neutral zone in the middle. The Qajar government was barely consulted. It was a low point for Iranian sovereignty.
How did Persia react to this?
There was a constitutional revolution around that time trying to limit the Shah's power and foreign influence, but it ultimately struggled. The change really came with a military coup in 1921 led by Reza Khan.
Who became Reza Shah Pahlavi, start of the Pahlavi dynasty.
Exactly. He established a new dynasty, sidelining the Qajars. His regime was authoritarian, strongly secular, nationalist, and very anti-communist. His main focus was rapid modernization.
What kind of modernization?
Building infrastructure, railways, factories, reforming the legal system, moving away from purely religious law, expanding education, including for women, trying to build a strong, centralized, modern nation-state on a European model. He even formally changed the country's name internationally from Persia to Iran in 1935 to emphasize its Aryan roots and break with the past.
But this rapid top-down secularization, it must have caused tension.
Massive tension, especially with the powerful Shia clergy and more traditional segments of society who saw it as undermining Iranian Islamic identity and importing alien Western values. Reza Shah ruled with an iron fist, suppressing dissent.
He was forced to abdicate during World War II, wasn't he, by Britain and the Soviet Union?
Yes. In 1941, they were worried about his perceived tilt towards Nazi Germany and wanted to secure supply lines through Iran. So they invaded and forced him out, putting his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, on the throne.
The Shah, most people remember.
Right.
And post-war, Iran was unstable.
Very unstable. You had this rising tide of nationalism, particularly focused on regaining control of the oil industry, which was still dominated by the British Anglo-Iranian oil company.
Which leads to Prime Minister Mossadegh.
Mr. Mohammad Mossadegh, a hugely popular nationalist figure, became prime minister in 1951 and promptly nationalized the AIOC.
A massive move against Western interests.
Huge. Britain was furious, organized a global boycott of Iranian oil. The U.S. initially tried to mediate, but eventually sided with the British. This led directly to the 1953 coup.
Sponsored by the CIA and MI6?
Yes, Operation Ajax. They orchestrated a coup that overthrew the democratically elected Mossadegh and restored the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, to absolute power.
An event with enormous lasting consequences for U.S.-Iran relations.
Absolutely toxic legacy. It destroyed Iranian trust in the West, particularly the U.S., and cemented the view for many Iranians that the Shah was an American puppet. Even though the Shah later pushed for and got greater control over oil revenues in 1973, the damage from 1953 was irreparable.
And the Shah's rule became increasingly autocratic, while also pushing modernization.
Yes. The White Revolution, the 1960s land reform, expanded literacy, more rights for women, progressive on paper, but implemented by decree, often riding roughshod over traditional structures, and accompanied by brutal repression of dissent through his secret police, Safavid. This combination of rapid disruptive change and political repression alienated both the traditional religious elements and the secular intellectuals.
Creating the conditions for the 1979 revolution.
Exactly. A broad coalition of opposition forces, religious conservatives led by the exiled Ayatollah Khomeini, secular liberals, leftists, students, came together to overthrow the Shah. It became the Islamic Revolution.
Transforming the country into the Islamic Republic, and the aftermath turbulent.
Very. A purge of former regime officials, but also brutal infighting among the revolutionaries themselves, with the Islamists eventually sidelining and suppressing the leftists and liberals. Then came the Iran hostage crisis, cutting ties with the U.S. and the West.
And then, almost immediately, war.
1 year later, 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq attack, hoping for a quick victory against a seemingly chaotic Iran. That starts the incredibly bloody 8-year Iran-Iraq war.
And Iraq wasn't fighting alone, were they?
No. This is crucial. Saddam received massive support, financial, military, intelligence from a bizarre coalition. The U.S., the Soviet Union, France, Britain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. Pretty much everyone was worried about the potential spread of Iran revolutionary ideology.
Which takes us pretty much up to the present day. Iran, under the Islamic Republic, facing Western sanctions over its nuclear program.
Right, but also very actively projecting its influence regionally. You see Iranian involvement or strong influence in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon with Hezbollah, Yemen with the Houthis, rebuilding a kind of modern sphere of influence in that traditional Persian space.
While also strengthening ties eastward.
Increasingly so, building stronger economic and strategic relationships with China and Russia, joining organizations like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a clear pivot away from the West towards a more multipolar world order.
Okay, so we've covered an immense sweep of history, 6,000. If we boil it down, what are maybe the two biggest takeaways about Persian resilience that keep emerging from this deep dive?
I think two things really stand out. First, just sheer administrative and engineering genius right from the start.
Like Cyrus's system.
Exact. That satrap system with the king's eyes, that balance of local power and central control, the incredible post road, and maybe most fundamentally, the Qanat, building infrastructure that was inherently durable, suited to the environment, and hard to destroy. That's a foundation for long-term stability.
Okay, administrative structure. What's the second thing?
It has to be the power of the culture itself, this remarkable ability to absorb invaders, to be conquered militarily, but then to culturally assimilate the conquered.
So, the Greeks come, the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, the rulers change.
The rulers change, the ruling language might change for a while, the religion might shift, but somehow Iranian civilization, Persian culture, the bureaucracy, the arts, the language itself, it endured. It often ends up shaping the conquerors more than they shape it in the long run. The invaders might take the throne, but the Iranians often kept running the show, ensuring that cultural continuity.
It's an incredible testament to that strength. So we started this by talking about that ancient conflict the sources highlight, the mountain people versus the plain people, this geographical struggle for regional dominance going back millennia.
Right. Iran on the plateau, Mesopotamia, Iraq on the fertile plain.
So here's the final thought for our listeners to chew on. When you look at modern Iran today, exerting its influence westward into Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, that traditional Persian sphere, while at the same time building stronger ties with Eastern powers like China and Russia, is it possible that what we're seeing is simply the latest chapter? Is today's complex geopolitics in some fundamental way just the newest, highest tech iteration of that same 6,000-year-old geographically driven struggle for mastery of the region?
It certainly makes you look at the headlines in a different light, doesn't it? Something to definitely ponder.